Tell me what's on your mind.
That was Information Society from their debut album from 1988, What's on Your Mind, Pure Energy. Great synth-pop band out of Minneapolis. They haven't had anything out in a long time, but they're back, and on the phone with us is their keyboard player, Paul Robb. So, Paul, what's the story? Why, after all these years, Information Society comes back?
You know, we did one of those horrible VH1 reality shows a couple of years ago.
Right.
And got the bulk of the old band together. And even though the singer Kurt boycotted the show, we did actually speak a lot around that time and talked about the show. And you know, it just kind of got my wheels turning. And then we were invited to do a big show in New York for KTU in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
In, what was that, '06. And it was so much fun that I said, you know, I'm going to just start writing songs and, you know, see what happens. And it turned into a great record. You know, and the other thing is that over the last few years, I had been sort of inspired by hearing some of the new electronic music that's been coming out, which I actually have been enjoying.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, I wasn't really a fan of techno.
Right.
Personally, and I felt like for most of the second half of the 90s and on through the early parts of the electronic music was pretty moribund and very generic sounding and not creative.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's not the case anymore. There's a lot of great music out there, and it just kind of got me excited to make some new music of my own.
So, in a way, what you did was you sort of went around the VH1 reunion show and sort of did it on your own.
Well, yeah, in a way. I mean, you know, the reason Kurt boycotted that reunion show had nothing to do with the band. It was everything to do with the circumstances of, you know, being ambushed by cheesy camera crews and, you know, glad-handing people trying to get you to make commitments and sign albums and that kind of thing. And we actually, we even were talking like making plans. We were going to, you know, perform some sort of psychodrama, unbeknownst to the VH1 people, like pretend that we were getting into a fist fight or something, you know, completely just to pull their leg. But we ended up not really caring enough about it to bother with anything like that.
Well, I know that you've been very busy since Information Society ended the first time, and now you're back. You've been doing a lot of TV work.
That's true. Yeah, I do a lot of TV work. I do a lot of, you know, cues for films and TV shows. I do a lot of TV commercials. And, you know, my sort of experimental alter ego think tank has been sort of percolating along the entire time as well. Although I don't try to promote that as a sort of a commercial entity,
mm-hmm.
but it's kind of my sandbox where I get to play around and do things that are more experimental than I would otherwise be allowed to do with Information Society, for instance.
Right. By the way, I should mention that the new Information Society album, since we're talking about it, is called Synthesizer, out on the Dancing Ferret label. And I'd read that you'd gotten a new lead singer. And so I was like, okay, and then I saw online that Kurt performed with you, and then I see that he's on the album.
Yeah, that's true. You know, here's the thing. We're all grown-ups now, and we all have lives. And, you know, Jim Cassidy is a professor at Oregon State University, and, you know, it's not like the olden days where we were all living together in the same house and, you
right.
know, dating the same girls and with each other 24/7. So there was some, you know, just some real-life kind of logistical realities that had to be faced. And, you know, the thing is, when we first started the group, we always looked at ourselves as sort of a creative collective,
mm-hmm.
which sounds a little pretentious, but, you know, that's what we were. We were a group of people, you know, doing what we wanted to do and having fun doing it. And there was that whole sort of rock star iconography that came later was more a result of pressure from MTV and record labels and management and stuff, you know, like you have to be a group, you have to have an identifiable singer, and, you know, you have to, people want to know what instrument you play and what instrument you play and blah, blah, blah. So we kind of kowtowed to that back in the day, but now that we're not under any pressure to have hits anymore,
right.
That's my code for saying we couldn't possibly have a hit today, even if we wanted to. We can do whatever we want. And what we wanted to do and could do on this record was invite a whole bunch of people to take part in the record, including the new singer, Chris Anton, and including the old singer, Kurt Larson, and a whole bunch of our other friends, too. You know, we even had my friend Colleen Fitzpatrick, who used to be known as Vitamin C, sing on this record, too. And, you know, it was a lot of fun.
Boy, I had a crush on her.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
I still have a crush on her. She's just still cute as a button.
You know what's great about this new record, Synthesizer, and that I should give out the title, it harkens back to the classic Information Society sound, and yet at the same time it's very modern and it's very looking ahead. It's not necessarily, you know, I don't know, how would you describe it? How would you describe the new album?
Well, I think what you just said is exactly right, and that's kind of what I was trying to do. I mean, I didn't want to put out something that was not true to what we were. And yet, obviously, I felt like just because of our evolution, I couldn't do something that sounded exactly like, you know, what we used to sound like.
Right.
But, you know, I also didn't want to try to pretend like we were 20-year-old Dutch DJ collective either.
Right.
You know, I mean, you know, I keep up with the pop music of today, and I kind of, I love a lot of it, you know, like the new Justice record, and, you know, that's one of my favorites, and, you know, Simeon Mobile Disco I think is really cool, and groups like that, but we couldn't make a record like that because that wouldn't appeal to our fans.
Right.
So, you know, we did a record that we thought sounded like Information Society, and, you know, by God, if it doesn't sound like Information Society.
So you're also checking out new electronic bands like Freeze Pop. Are you familiar with
Freeze
them?
Pop, The Faint. I mean, a lot of these bands. You know, it's the cyclical nature of pop music, man. And you know, the irony for old geezers like us is that if we put out a song that sounded like a Faint song, people would say, "Oh, that's so old. You guys are so, you know, out of, you know, fashion." But because it's 20-year-old kids doing it, it's the height of current.
Right, right.
You know? But that's fine because, you know, when we were 20 years old, we were imitating our elders too, and that's how pop music works.
Well, now you have the role of elder statesman.
Yeah, I'm sorry to say.
Now,
even back, you know, even 15 years ago, we were doing a record. We were doing a couple songs with some of the guys from Kraftwerk, and we were laughing because you remember there was a tour called Monsters of Rock back then.
Right, sure.
And we were joking about Monsters of Techno, and then we decided actually it wouldn't be called Monsters of Techno, it would be called Dinosaurs of Techno.
Now, would you consider Information Society something of a cult sensation?
You know, that depends on who you ask. We started out as an underground band. We kind of stumbled into pop status and top 10 hit status and touring the world status. We didn't really change that much. We got a little better at what we did. But, you know, like a lot of underground bands that are surprised by their own success, we weren't really prepared to do what it took to kind of maintain that pop status.
Right.
It wasn't like we were out doing, you know, working with choreographers and taking voice lessons and consulting with wardrobe stylists and stuff. You know, we wore what we wore, we said what we said, and when we sang, we were out of tune, and, you know, that's always the way we were. And now we're an underground band again, which is, you know, perfectly fine.
So do we, considering the nature of Information Society and how this album is, where, you have your friends come in and play. Is that the future now of Information Society? Maybe an album every couple of years?
I hope so. The thing is, when I decided to do this, Kurt Larson, the singer, actually, theoretically, legally owned the name to the band. Because when I decided to call it quits way back in the early 90s, or, whenever it was, 93, 94, we just said, yeah, go ahead, take the name. He still wanted to make records. We didn't. And then, when I got this bee in my bonnet about doing a new record and kind of starting to do something again and be active again, I kind of just guilted him into giving me the name back. I said, come on, you haven't done anything with the band in, who knows how long, and you're not intending to. So let me do something. And you sing, too. And, he was very comfortable with that. He said, as long as I don't have to, bear the responsibility of doing anything, as long as I don't have to work too hard or be responsible for it, I'm happy to take part. Which, that worked right into my whole control freak thing. And so there you go.
So there's no feud or anything like that.
No, there's no. I mean, we feuded much more when we actually worked together than we ever did. You know what I mean? And the thing that has kind of freed us now is that our lives are not depending on the success of this new record. And that takes a lot of the pressure off. Because we're happy to do what we do, and, if it sells 5,000 copies, that's great. If it sells 50,000 copies, that's great. It's not going to make much of a difference to any of us either way. And that is very liberating.
Well, listen, Paul, is there a place online? I mean, of course, we all know the answer to this question, but is there a place online where people can find out what Information Society is doing? Well,
I'm embarrassed to say the most updated spot, or the most frequently updated spot for Information Society information is MySpace, which is MySpace / Information Society.
Right.
But then our website is also a good spot to get news and updates, and that's informationsociety.us, strangely enough.
Thank you, Paul, for being on the show.
Thanks very much. It was a pleasure.